So, welcome everyone again to another episode of the IdeaXme show, the show that profiles the individuals behind the really big ideas that are shaping the world, inspiring future and future creators. And for all those that like really great stories, I'm Ira Pastor. I'm normally the health ambassador on this show, but today I'm going to be wearing several different hats as we get into the topics of bravery, of perseverance. Um, so on a few previous shows, we've touched on the global problem of drug abuse, of both legal and illegal drugs, primarily looking at the problem sort of from a therapeutic perspective. And specifically, we've talked about different opiate withdrawal technologies and so forth. But obviously, the problem of drugs is a much bigger one than that. According to U.S. National Survey on Drug Use and Health, it's estimated around right now about 20 million American adults are battling some form of substance abuse disorder. Drug use and addiction cost American society around $750 billion annually when we look at workplace productivity, healthcare expenses, crime, and globally, the numbers go off the charts. It is a major war, amazing proportions on many different fronts, some which we win, some which we have problems with, but one that's constantly changing and one that we always need to stay ahead of. And that's why I'm really very honored today to be joined by our guest. And he is a gentleman whose career is really not something you could encapsulate in movies or miniseries appropriately. Dan Addario spent close to 3 decades with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA, rising to the role of special agent in charge, was the highest ranking field agent for the DEA under 5 different presidents, heading up anti-drug operations in 13 countries around the world, throughout South America, Southeast Asia, here in the U.S. as well. He started his career here in Philadelphia, as one of the nation's first narcotics undercover agents. It was back in 1954. And he was involved in the capture of some of the world's most notorious drug lords, and was even on the scene when Panamanian strongman Manuel Noriega was captured by U.S. forces. His dossier of various adventures in his career consists, but is by no means limited to the chase and capture of Auguste Joseph Ricord, who was the French Corsican heroin trafficker, one of the founding members of the French Connection, which was immortalized in the 1970 Gene's Hackman movie. He was involved in the cultivation of our strategic relationship with Manuel Noriega, who at the time was on our side and sort of head of the Panamanian police. He visited with the Congressional Committee on Narcotics, the Golden Triangle opium empire of Burmese opium king Kun Sa. At one point, he was involved in major drug bust and arrest of dozens of Hell's Angels, including their head Sonny Barger, the destruction of many of Timothy Leary's LSD labs. He arrested Ray Charles at one point. Really a fascinating dossier. Sadly, in 1993, the very scourge that he was battling came home and was responsible for sadly taking the life of his son Daniel with regard to opiate addiction, and we'll get into that topic a little later on. He retired from the DEA and then spent time in the area of the news in the San Francisco area, and recently has published a wonderful book called Chasing the Dragon: How to Win the War on Drugs, where he recounts obviously his long history, but really puts forth a range of new ideas on how we can, in 2019, really address this problem from many different angles. All that being said, Dan, thanks for taking the time today to come on the show.
Well, that was a great introduction, and God, I want to know who that guy is. Great job. You did your homework. No, it's a real thrill to be here and really to meet you. And we've kind of talked to each other over a period of time, and I'm very impressed by the work that you're doing, and stuff that you're doing is beyond my comprehension. You're way out of my league on that. I'll stay with the narcotic stuff.
Not too far at the league. Actually, chasing you, I was telling my wife before, I was kind of like I was like Dan Addario trying to chase you down. But it was great that I finally was able to get you on this show.
It's great to talk to somebody from my old hometown, Philadelphia. I miss the cheesesteaks and the good food and the fine people and the not so crazy politics like we had in San Francisco and other areas, but quite a great city, though. It's still a great city, is all I could say. But let's get back to the serious end of this. The thing is, this opiate crisis, it's not a Democrat or Republican problem. I mean, that's something that we have to get on the table. And what's going on now is with this impeachment thing, tying up Congress and the White House, other priorities are being neglected, like the gun violence and opiate crisis. They're too busy fighting with each other, and no one's paying attention to the opiate crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, last year, we lost 47,000 people from drug overdose deaths. And no one's addressing that. It's like they're ignoring it.
Yeah.
Even look at the whatever 20 candidates are running for president and the president himself. No one is asking them any questions about what are your plans to do about the opiate crisis. I mean, they're throwing softball at them. Oh, talk about this, talk about that. None of them have a plan.
Yeah.
They all speculate. We all know what the problem is. I offer solutions. I have solutions to the problem. That's the key of my book. I mean, it's not talking about all the stuff I did, undercover stuff and arresting this and with Noriega and all. Sure, that adds authenticity to my story. But I offer solutions. And my solutions, if I can get these solutions to the president and to Congress, we could save, with your help, you have a really good outlet and a network of people. We could save countless lives.
I agree with that completely.
I'm trying to save lives. I don't care about selling books. That's the real key thing with me.
I'm on the same page with you. I want to get into some of your ideas in a short bit. I just wanted to start off though, and obviously I want them to get the book and read everything about it. But just if you can just quickly to start off, just go into sort of how you got started in law enforcement. Basically, you're a little bit on the path of when you were interested in law enforcement, your beginnings here in Philadelphia, and sort of what the transition was that took you from undercover agent on the street to running after drug kingpins, warlords, and dictators. And if you can just fill that in for a few minutes, it's a fascinating piece of the story to ultimately where you are and how you've sort of developed all this knowledge and insight.
Well, I was in the Army in the Korean War, 1951 to 1953. And when I got honorably discharged in 53, I kind of didn't know what I was going to do. Philadelphia, wandering around, maybe go back to college and on the GI program. Then I ran into an old friend of mine who was directing traffic in front of City Hall. He and I went to high school together. And he said, God, Dan, I hadn't seen you. And so we talked about it. He said, the police department are looking for recruits. He said, because there's a new mayor in and they want a problem with corruption and things like that with it. So he said, it's a good job. So I took the test and came in out of 5,000, about 350 something, whatever it was. And I was appointed to the police department. First day in the academy, I was picked out by Lieutenant McDermott, Tom McDermott. And he said, we want to talk to you about working undercover. And I said, well, I didn't know anything about undercover work and things like that. So that started my career. And the reason he picked me, he said, well, you don't look like a regular cop should look like. It's what he put. In other words, I could blend in with the junkies, the hippies, the musicians, and all that other type of people that weren't stereotyped as, cops. And that's what started my career. And it went on, put me in undercover, threw me in a cell with junkies, and gave me a undercover identification. So I went out undercover, made buys in Philadelphia, and went on to make buys in other places. And then the career in Philly got a little too political there, because I got involved with knocking off one of the clubs that belonged to one of the congressmen, or not the congressman, one of the city council persons in North Philly. Became the mayor later, Mayor Tate. It was his club. And we got in there undercover, knocked it off. And all of a sudden, they put the heat on me. They threw me under the bus. They said, this crazy kid don't know what he's doing. and I didn't have nothing to do with it. So all the lieutenants and captains and the chiefs of police, they all dumped me. So I was back in uniform walking a beat. So I figured, I'm not going to do this stuff. So therefore, I did some work and was assigned to the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, working with them undercover in Atlantic City and places like that. And that's when I was offered a job to join the feds by the commissioner. Then I had a congressional appointment. And that started my career in the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which is now DEA today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Excellent. I appreciate that background.
And then,
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't interrupt.
And then, my career went from Philadelphia to New York, back to Philly again, from Philadelphia to Detroit, from Detroit to San Francisco, from San Francisco to Thailand, and from Thailand to South America, Southeast Asia, and then back to San Francisco again. And that's basically where I went. Well, I did a tour in Washington too. And so I've had about 12 transfers within that. But it's all upper mobility. So you had to go where they wanted you to go. And it worked out well for me. But the thing is, dragging kids out of school into a new country. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that goes on. So you just can't take a cop and say, okay, you're going to go to Thailand. You're going to be dealing with the ambassadors as not only a narcotic agent, but as a diplomat. And prior to them selecting me for this diplomatic role in Thailand, the State Department has to interview your wife, your family dog, the kids, and see how they would get along in a foreign country. And that was all. And then you had to go through 2 weeks of charm school with the State Department to teach you what fork to use and what word to say when you're at an ambassador's dinner, to show that we're not sophisticated, all Philadelphia people that say them, these, that's, and those. So, a little bit of sophistication. And then you got to go through the CIA, a couple of weeks of indoctrination there about what is going on in that foreign country, what are the priorities, then you had to get top secret clearance. So it's not only like sending, we're going to send you overseas. You got to go through a whole bunch of stuff, and family and the dog and everybody else. So I'm oversimplifying it, but that's what it takes.
No, it's a fascinating path, and actually that point is on my list here. Obviously, I'm going to go into a few things in the book. I'm not going to go into all of them, but one of the areas that I find fascinating, and obviously I only know this area. As I said, I have to apologize early on. I watch Narcos. I'll watch movies like Kill the Messenger, but at the end of the day, this is new area to me. But you make a statement in the book, which is fascinating, and you basically you say if it hadn't been for CIA or State Department meddling, let's say, you would have gotten a lot more done. And I could just think to when I'm watching there's that scene in all of these shows or movies where there's the Dan Addario character who's put in the time, put in the effort, dodged bullets, put his life on the line, is ready to close the deal, and then a phone call comes. Well, there's some CIA person or someone from the State Department that messes everything up. Can you just talk about that point a little bit, and sort of how some of these agencies, which should I guess be working together better, sometimes mess things up?
The example is even like in Thailand, when we were working with the Thai government and we had located a number of heroin clandestine labs in the Golden Triangle between Burma, Laos, and Thailand. And with my cooperation working with General Pal Saracen, who was the Director General of the Thai National Police, we'd identified all of these different labs there with coordinated airstrikes and everything else. So we made this proposal to the ambassador who was in Thailand at the time. His name was Charlie Whitehouse, of all names, Charlie Whitehouse. And he was all bent out of shape because he said, how are you going to destroy these labs? And I said, well, I'm not going to destroy. I said, the Thai government has all this information that we provided them, and they're going to go in and with the Thai and the Burmese army, and they're going to go in and destroy these labs. And it's a military operation. Well, he said, I don't want you involved with that. It's human rights, and we can't do it, and this and that. And I said, I'm not doing it. I said, the Thais are doing it. So he and I got into a big battle about this. And there's an example of his involvement, saying we shouldn't do it, State Department. Then you had the CIA saying, well, we have informants in that area. We can't touch that. We don't want to do anything about it. Meanwhile, the drugs are coming in by the tons. They could care less about that.
Mm.
And there's one example of lack of cooperation. And here's one of my solutions to this would be you need a person in charge of this whole drug thing, like a drug czar, say, for that has the same stature as a cabinet position. In other words, this person, he or she, can talk to, say, Secretary of State, who is Mike Pompeo now. He would be on the same level as Mike.
Okay.
He would be able to say, well, wait a minute, DEA, we're going to do this, and then let them at that level talk about it. Before, it would be an ambassador down here would have more clout than the DEA agent that would be trying to get this job done in Thailand. You need to have somebody at that level, and someone that has direct access to the president, without three people in between, or all these little ad hoc committees in between. Somebody has to have a direct line into the president to keep the drugs a priority. That's not happening today. It's fragmented. Today you have an attorney general who is so busy with impeachment, all kind of nonsense going on down there in Congress. He doesn't have the time to really focus on a narcotic problem. So therefore, this narcotic and opiate crisis is way on the back burner. It's way, and no one seems to care about, as you mentioned, and I mentioned, 47,000 lives lost last year and climbing. Meanwhile, the congressional people are over in Middle East somewhere doing something else in that country. We got to take care of us here.
Right.
And those are the solutions. I have solutions, and that's one of them is you need someone that can talk directly to the president and to Congress that has the clout,
Right.
that can, make the opiate crisis a priority, a top priority.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about opiates, because we've discussed on the show in the past. So for those that should be familiar, opiates are a class of drugs that include the illicit drug heroin, but also all the sort of illegal painkillers, oxycodone, hydrocodone, codeine, fentanyl, and so forth. And of that 20 million or so the addicts we have in the U.S., it's estimated that about 2 million or so have some substance use disorder involving prescription pain relievers. Got half a million or so related to heroin, and we have, as you mentioned, almost 50,000 deaths every year in the U.S. Now, as you know, I come out of the pharmaceutical industry. I never worked in the opiate industry, but I'm a pharmacist by training. And here we have, like other, obviously opiates have been around since the beginning of the 20th century, as many of these other legal, I call them, these legal products, whether they're barbiturates or benzos, they start off, as pharmaceutical products, yet we forget that, we sort of think they're candy at some point, and then they become this major problem. One of your major issues in the book, or major themes in the book, point in this area, is holding doctors and big pharma accountable. Now we're seeing a little bit of that in the recent news with the J&Js and the Purdue Pharmas, that fentanyl guy that they recently arrested. Talk a little bit about this topic, because I think it's extremely important as we balance a class like this where we have the illegal stuff like heroin, but also the connection to all this legal junk that's pumping around the country.
Well, the thing is, you have a number of problems. It's not, when we talk about opiates, we have the heroin, cocaine, you have fentanyl, Fentanyl today seems to be one of the biggest problems that we're having because it is much more potent than heroin. And what a lot of the addicts are using today, they're mixing heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. And that's what's causing a lot of the overdose deaths. Getting back to big pharmaceutical companies, the overproduction of the oxycodone and things like that, I think that's something that needs to be addressed because there was a couple of major cases that were made where a pharmaceutical company was supplying a small community, I think it was in Virginia somewhere, with millions and millions of oxycodone pills, that enough there that could supply the entire rest of the United States. Where was all those drugs going? I mean, those are the things that check and balance, and that's the job that DEA and should get, and the FDA should get involved with, checking on that. It's not the idea. We need things, people that have legitimate needs for oxycodone and things like that. Definitely, that should be available. I mean, I have arthritis, and I have real severe pains, and I had a knee operation and knee replaced and stuff. And I know the legitimate needs for that type of medication. My wife, she has peripheral neuropathy, and we know about what fentanyl can do and can help and alleviate the pain. So those are the things, the legitimate people like all of us, and a lot of them, I'm sure, that have legitimate needs for these opiates. And all the other overproduction stuff, that's where the money's coming in.
Mm.
That's where there should be a check and balance. And that's what not is happening. And again, there's too many lobbyists involved paying money by the pharmaceutical companies to Congress for their election campaigns and campaign funds. And they have control over a lot of our congressional people. I'm talking about the pharmaceutical company. They have a tremendous lobby in Congress and the Senate and the White House. Money talks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Money talks.
This is unfortunately the case.
And another thing too, with all the arrests that are being made by state, local, federal, all over the country, all over the world, you cannot measure the success of the opiate crisis by the number of drug arrests, by the cartels, the number of drug seizures. Count the number of drug overdose deaths. That's the check and balance.
Mm-hmm.
And no one wants to pay attention to that. All of a sudden you'll see a DEA agent or a customs agent sitting on mounds of cocaine or marijuana, biggest bus arrests, local police, sheriffs, biggest drug arrests, doesn't do a damn thing. Count the number of deaths. Count the number of deaths. That's the measure right there.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And there was a huge fentanyl seizure here in Philly. It was last year at some point, but it was a staggering amount. And I don't know how much that translates to doses and all that, but it's I understand what you're saying in regard to looking at those overdoses, because that's bigger. And
the biggest thing, fentanyl, the biggest manufacturer and producer of illegal fentanyl is coming from China.
Yeah.
China.
Yep.
And and here's another one of my solutions. What the president is doing and has done in Mexico is coming up with sanctions and diplomatic pressure to get the Mexican government to do something on their side of the wall on the narcotic trafficking. Because most of the narcotics that comes in to the United States comes across that Mexican border.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember years ago when President Nixon shut the border down, there was a shortage of heroin in New York for the first time in like 20 years. So what Trump is doing now, he's got the attention of the Mexican government. They're doing enough. They're doing something on that side of the border, but not enough. He needs to do the same thing to China,
Mm-hmm.
to get the Chinese government to do something about the overproduction and illegal production of fentanyl in
Mm-hmm.
their, and that could be done by diplomatic sanction, diplomatic pressure. Money talks.
Absolutely.
That's the only way you get there. That's the only way you get the Mexicans' attention. The only way you get the Chinese attention. What we got in Thailand, we did the same thing with the Thai.
Mm-hmm.
Money, cut off the products, cut off the air, cut off the helicopters, cut off our commodities we're giving them to fight the war on the opiates.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
need to do.
Headed back down towards Thailand for a minute, because there's a interesting theme here, something that you were involved in many years ago, but which also sort of resonates today, and this is the topic of substitution, crop substitution, and replacement. And the thing that, if we can give the coca grower or the opiate, the poppies producers, something equal or more valuable than that crop, obviously something beneficial can transpire there. Can you talk about that a little bit? But also, you mentioned that, we were talking offline a little about the theme of just, we're a pretty rich country, and the raw material for this stuff is a lot cheaper than the street value. This concept of just buying it all, sort of being we're the largest producer of military equipment too. The concept of purchasing and getting rid of, sort of pulling sort of the demand in one direction for a lot of this really cheap raw material that goes towards making some of these extremely high value products. Talk a little about the crop substitution stuff and your views on that.
Well, in Thailand, in the Golden Triangle area up in Chiang Mai, that's where all the opium products are growing.
Mm-hmm.
The cocoa plant, or not the cocoa plant, the opium. And we had an agreement with the Thai government and the United Nations. We went into those and met with the opium farmers, and we made a deal with them that we would subsidize their crop with coffee plants.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's conducive. That climate was conducive to growing good coffee, and a coffee crop takes around 5 years to mature, mm-hmm. so you can finally hit the market with it. We agreed to have an agreement with the farmers to pay them to grow coffee beans. We would give them the same money they would make by growing opium, and give them a little bonus on top of that. So the farmers would be satisfied to be getting the same money plus a little bit of a cushion, a little bit of a bonus. They'd be living the same way, same living style, but they would be out of the opium business.
Mm-hmm.
That's going on now. Now, I don't know how much they're pursuing that because there are other priorities. I haven't heard anything more about United Nations and crop substitution in years.
Mm-hmm.
That is a program that is still going on, and that program will work in cocaine areas and the opiate areas. So it's money well spent.
Mm-hmm.
It's money well spent. We need to stop the drugs at their source.
Yeah,
that's where you need to do it. Once it gets into the country, it goes all over the place. You need to stop it at the source.
Flying back now from Thailand to Philadelphia, and going back onto the opiate theme, Philadelphia right now is sort of a little, aside from having a major opiate problem, we are the sort of the battleground for something known as Safe House, where there's an organization that wants to set up, I guess similar to different European countries, sort of a safe location for opiate addicts to inject, I guess, clean needles, and also some type of fentanyl testing so they don't kill themselves. My question had to do with the topic of a safe house, which is, they're going to try it here in Philadelphia. I think it's the the first of its type in the U.S. anywhere. You can as an addict, you can go there, you get your clean needle, inject your heroin, test it for fentanyl. People are pretty mad on both sides of the debate. A lot of argument going on. Can you give us your thoughts on the concept? Do you think it's obviously it's been used elsewhere in other countries? Do you think it has legs in the U.S.?
And that's former Governor Rendell is pushing that.
Yeah,
I liked him. He's a pretty good guy. I think there's some merit to that, the clean needle thing. But I also feel that we should take a real good look at that methadone program. I think that was doing pretty well there, and I think coupled with the clean needle thing, and possibly the methadone and some other ideas, the object would be is to get people off of the drugs, not induce them to keep trying and using a drug. So I think getting them off of maybe the heroin and cocaine, and maybe dependent on methadone, which has been proven that addicts that take methadone can function properly and do their 9-to-5 work, whatever they do.
mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's an area there's a lot that can be done on the demand side that's not being done.
Mm-hmm.
The supply side, that gets all the publicity, the drug arrests, the drug busts and the front page stuff. But this supply side, the demand side rather, is not being addressed properly. There should be a lot more money put into that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not equally proportioned. Enforcement seems to get all the money.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need more in the rehab side.
Gotcha.
And that's an area that should be really looked at. And I don't know, with all of the political people running for office and everything, none of them even talk about the opiate crisis. That's what's really disturbing. And none of the even the moderators on these different committees that have these Democratic candidates lined up and Republican candidates, none of them is questioning hardball. What are your plans? What do you know about the opiate crisis? What would you do if you were elected president? What would you do?
Yeah.
If you were carte blanche? I'd like to hear some of those answers.
I don't think I've heard that question anywhere in any of these debates. It's scary. It is indeed scary that we're not focusing on it at all. Hopping though for a moment from opiates now to marijuana. One of the topics you talk about in the book is legalization, decriminalization. I'd love to hear Dan Addario's view as to what's going on now in terms of the legalization, decriminalization component of this. Is it all good? Are there negative sides to this thing? Because once again,
go ahead. That is an excellent question. First of all, marijuana should be decriminalized, at least. It's classified as a class 1 drug, along with heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, and stuff. It should not be in that category.
Mm-hmm.
It should be declassified, and that takes an act of Congress to do that. That's not a simple thing to do. So what we need to do is the antiquated laws have to be changed.
Okay.
I believe that we should decriminalize. I think marijuana, there's been lots of studies on it. We don't know what effect it would have as far as medical use, as far as, helping with people with arthritis and things like that. That's the jury's out on that, but there's some good stuff about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think marijuana should be, in other words, it should be distributed once it's declassified, like we're doing with the ABC laws. You have to be 18, you have to be 21, you have to be this, and this to buy it, just like a state store, like in Pennsylvania, they have state stores. Here we have ABC laws in North Carolina. I think the profits from that we should take the profits that these mom and pop uh, pot shops are showing up, like in Colorado, California, and other places. They're making billions of dollars on that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that money should be made by the states, by the government, and that money should be distributed and used for rehabilitation and education. And there's billions of dollars there that could be used in
Mm-hmm.
this drug war. And I think we're losing a lot of money there. And no one wants to address this marijuana thing, to declassify it. But
Mm-hmm.
it takes congressional order. It takes Congress and the Senate and the White
Sure.
House.
Sure.
Who in the Congress is going to propose a bill? I mean, I haven't seen anyone even talk about it.
Yep. Yeah.
It would be decriminalize it. I mean, there has to be some. The way it's going now, all these little places are showing up, and the people that are investing in these mom and pop shops, they're making billions of dollars.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money there, and that money should be going towards rehabilitation, education, and enforcement.
Excellent.
And that's, I don't know how many of my colleagues in law enforcement feel that way, but it's about time that we're wasting too much money enforcing the narcotic laws, the
Mm-hmm.
marijuana laws,
Mm-hmm.
wasting a lot of money, manpower, people power, airplanes, helicopters, destroying the crop. That's waste of money, a
Mm-hmm.
waste of money.
One other thing I want to ask you about. I know this is a little. I mean, it's connected because obviously this war is violence. And, whether we're looking in Mexico or other countries or here on the U.S. streets, illegal drugs come with a lot of violence, and with the violence, obviously, guns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd love to have not just your experience, doing what you do and with the drug lords and so forth, but at the same time, love to have Dan Addario's views on the gun problem, and if there's things that we can learn um, from your drug knowledge to address the gun problem.
Well, first of all, if you look at the drug cartels, the recent arrest and incarceration of a guy like El Chapo, who is the big Mexican drug lord. Now, we talk about cooperation with Mexico. Now, how come Mexico would let someone like this run amok in their country and sell millions of dollars of heroin, cocaine, marijuana, what else have you, and let him run freely? They had him incarcerated in some of the top secret uh, different prisons in Mexico. He managed to escape with tunnels. Okay. Now, Trump is fixated on the wall, talks about the wall, the wall, the wall. The wall is not the answer, the total answer. The wall is a deterrent. Let me say this. I've seen some of the tunnels that the Thais can put together over in Bangkok and up in the Golden Triangle. I've seen some of the tunnels along the California San Ysidro border. By the time that wall is complete, the Mexican cartels will be over it or under it. They have the sophistication. I mean, have you ever seen some of the sophisticated tunnels that El Chapo used to escape? I'm
Yeah.
talking about motorcycle, electricity, water, everything else but, room service. I mean, he built with his money, billions of dollars. They built a tunnel that got him out of the last so-called maximum state prison in Mexico. The thing was almost like a 10-story building high. The tunnel was that long. Now, how could that be going on and the Mexican government know nothing about it? You need equipment, you need electricity, you need diggers, you need all kind of machinery to do that. So there's, half-ass cooperation. They give us a little bit, we take a little bit. You'll never get 100% cooperation from the foreign government. I noticed the same thing working with Noriega. Noriega and I became good friends, but he
Mhm.
gave us what he wanted to give us. Noriega also worked for Cuba. He was very friendly with Castro.
Mhm.
He worked with the Russians, and he worked with us. You got to get what you can get in a foreign government. So the point I'm making is the wall is certain areas I think is a good deterrent, but it's not the total answer.
Sure.
Unless Mexico commits themselves 100%, nothing's going to happen. Unless Congress and the White House and the Senate commit to this opiate crisis and the gun violence, nothing's going to happen. This impeachment thing has got Congress tied in knots in the White House. All they're doing is defending the current impeachment process. That's taken up the entire Congress. I mean, they're just completely tied up with that. I haven't heard one congressperson talk about narcotics or the opiate crisis or the Senate.
We have to get Dan Addario on the question panel of one of these debates,
I'd love to
because
talk. I'd love to
without your
talk.
voice, no one's going to ask the question. I have a feeling, and that's a big problem. I want to thank you, not just for the show, but personally for everything that you did since the 1950s, and in your part in keeping us safe and keeping these drugs off the streets, and trying to stem the tide. I know it's a major war, it's many fronts, but you were out there, and just really appreciate not just what you did, but coming on the show today and giving the insights. And once again, for everybody that's going to be watching, and as well as listening on the various radio networks,
Mm-hmm.
pick up a copy of Chasing the Dragon: How to Win the War on Drugs, written by our guest Dan Addario. A wonderful set of solutions, and really forward thinking, and probably one of the main people thinking about this problem nowadays with all this other nonsense going on. But Dan, if there's any final points you want to make, please take us out. And once again, it's really been an honor having you.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and you did your homework. You knew a lot about stuff that I probably even forgotten about. But you must have glanced through the book a little bit.
Dan, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate
Here
you
too,
taking the
Ira.
time.